Good morning. Hope you guys can hear me out there in the internet universe. I see some head nods. Cool. Awesome. Well, we have a lot to cover today, so I want to just get right into it because I know I have a hard stop at 9 o'clock. So hopefully we can cover as much of this as possible. This is our beginner-oriented question and answer call, and we've kind of gathered about 10 questions that are really beginner-oriented, things that athletes who are newer to the sport are often thinking about when they first kind of get started with us. If you are not a beginner runner, don't tune out, because I think that there's some really useful information in here. And some of these questions are sometimes overlooked by runners who have been running for a long time. So, of course, if you've got a follow-up, you can always use the chat box. Yeah, let's just start by defining kind of what we think a new runner is. My kind of belief is a new runner is a runner who has been running for definitely less than a year. And maybe even depending on how consistent that athlete has been, we could probably stretch that to 2 or 3 years too. If you're one of those athletes who's gotten into it and you're very consistent in your first year, great. Not all athletes are like that. And so we talk a lot about consistency here and the importance of consistency. And it's that accumulated experience that really matters. That's how we can kind of differentiate between whether we're newer to the sport or we're a true veteran of the sport. We have a lot of runners on both ends. So one of the first questions we get as coaches regarding like how to approach training as a newer runner is pacing a run. How should we pace runs? Should those runs be based on heart rate or relative perceived exertion? What is a good RPE scale to use? I think these are just like really important questions to answer right off the bat. Drew, I'm going to turn it to you to give us a little 101.
Yeah, for sure. So this is honestly like really, really, really important. Like we see this from a lot of athletes who are just getting into it, or athletes that are maybe switching from like road running to trail running, just whatever's new to them, right? I try to dissuade my athletes from paying attention to pace, like specifically like their pace. They're like, well, if I'm starting out and this is my goal, what should I be running at? And really trying to disregard that your pace, honestly, especially when you get started, and honestly through a lot of your training, it really doesn't matter. Most of our training should be done at what I call like our conversation pace. I know we've discussed that previously in other calls, where if someone a friend runs up on you while you're running and, hey, how are you feeling? You should be able to, oh, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm just going out for an easy 2-mile run or whatever it is. You should be able to have that conversation and not feel like you're going to die, right? If you get out there and you're like, well, I'm just trying to, and you just find yourself having a hard time breathing, really, you're probably running a little bit too fast. And when it comes to, I guess, heart rate, that was another thing mentioned. I know that at Microcosm, we really try not to delve into heart rate, that our perceived effort is really what we're trying to dial in on. Heart rate, especially for a newer runner or beginner runner, definitely I get nervous about someone paying attention to that. It can seem like if you're unsure about running, generally speaking, sometimes if someone's like, well, like I'll just follow my heart rate and do that, it can really be kind of a scary, I guess, stat to really pay attention to. as a new runner, someone that maybe you took a break for a while, like your heart rate's going to go through some shit, right? So we really want to try to avoid that. If you start looking like, man, my heart rate is like skyrocketed and I've only been running for 30 seconds, that's a real big limiting factor, where if you can ignore all the data and just go on how you feel, how your body feels, slow down, you just kind of see more consistency, and it's easier to kind of get through those beginning runs.
Yeah, totally. And it's really normal if you haven't run for a long time or you are a newer runner, again, like year or less. It's so normal for heart rate to feel really high when you are running as easy as you can. And that's just because your aerobic system isn't as developed as other runners. And you kind of need to accept that reality. And that's another good reason why we don't want to go down that heart rate rabbit hole. There's other reasons that we've talked about on previous calls. So I don't really think we need to like get into the nuts and bolts too much on that. But yeah, go by what feels right. Always try to maintain a conversational effort on your easy runs. I mean, that is just the bread and butter and the key when you're first getting into it. And actually, like, as you continue to progress, you'll find that, you know, that conversational kind of effort is the benchmark, basically all the time for athletes of every level. That's how Killian trains. That's how, you know, the world's best train in marathoning and everything. So just keep that in mind. You can also use a relative perceived effort scale. We have a 1 through 10 scale that's really helpful for athletes who are starting to get into workouts and trying to just learn what it kind of feels like to run at different effort zones. Again, we've done a previous call explaining that scale in detail, so I'm not going to get back into it, and you guys can just feel free to Google that, or to look it up in our archives of calls. But again, like, if you want to dive a little bit deeper, check that out. Can be really helpful for newer athletes who are just getting into workouts, starting to do hill strides and fast strides, and maybe even get into some longer format interval training. All right. So if the consensus is like, we're running easy, it's all about conversational miles and a conversational feel out there, we want to kind of translate that into the consistent habit of training, right? Like, the whole point is we need to figure out like how to take a newer athlete who hasn't developed the habit around running and help them develop that habit. Because if you can get to running 4 to 5 days a week, it's going to make a massive difference. It's really like the biggest secret to success. It's consistency and frequency of running over time. And this isn't just for beginners. This is for runners of all levels. So just think about that for a minute. Like, when we're more consistent, we're able to reinforce the biomechanical patterns, the neuromuscular aspect of running that is really key and fundamental for developing efficiency. And when we develop efficiency, we use less oxygen to go a given effort. Our breathing relaxes a lot more. Our heart rates come down. And so when we're not consistent, when we're not running frequently, it's very hard to get to that point. So we need to develop that habit. And so how can we develop a habit as a new runner? How do we get from running infrequently, maybe once a week, you know, maybe twice a week here and there, to running 5 days a week? Sarah, let me turn it to you here for a couple of pointers on developing a new routine.
Sorry, I was muted. So with any new routine, we want to really focus on like not biting off more than we can chew. So you don't want to change like 5 things at once. You're not like, I'm going to develop a really great running habit and work on my diet this week and, you know, like set 4 goals, right? So when we want to start with consistent running, that's what we're focused on, consistent running. So when you want to start new routine or ritual, things that are helpful are having like a cue, a visual cue. So that can be linking it to something that you're already doing. So making it part of your morning routine, or making it part of your lunch routine, making it part of when you're already meeting up with somebody. So making it part of what you're already doing, and then making it really easy. So if you're doing it first thing when you wake up, you have your clothes set out, you've got the coffee started, programmed, brewing. So when you wake up, you've got the visual cue of your clothes, you're smelling coffee, and there are all these sensory things engaged, reminding you to do the thing. And then the more consistent you are with it, the easier it is for the body to remember that. So even though it seems like it would be easier to just do something like twice a week, that's actually harder because we lose the pattern and we lose that momentum. So you want to do something, with repetition as much as you can. Doing something like having a calendar and actually checking it off or crossing it off, it seems really silly, but it can feel really good to see that progress. And then celebrating the little milestones along the way. Like I know Drew always celebrates each week with his athletes and acknowledges like a week of finishing training. And so making sure that you're not focused on that big goal of, I want to get to, 3 months of consistent running, but like, hey, I just did my Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday workouts. I ran 3 days in a row, right? Like we're going to celebrate that. Yeah, I think that's all I've got.
Yeah. And Drew, I would love, because that consistency of habit is so important. Can you just mention what you like to do with your athletes? Because I know this is kind of universal across the entire team, but with regard to having a little activity on those non-running days to stay engaged in the process.
Yeah, it kind of piggybacks off of what Sarah just said. It's genius. Like we're creating routine. So even if you're only running a couple days a week, that's fine. But like she said, setting the coffee, laying out your clothes, and doing some activity is so important. For me, and I know a lot of you that are listening, we have a lot of responsibilities, little kids, like running around the house. So my time that I've got to run is very limited. And so I have to make sure that every day that if I'm going to run, I have to run at the same time. And so on weeks where I know that I'm maybe not able to run, whether it's weather or I'm injured or, whatever it is, like setting aside that time to still wake up, go through my routine, have my coffee, have my breakfast, put on clothes, and then maybe stretch, or maybe, I don't know what else I do around here. It's crazy. Maybe do like an ab routine, which is rare for me. I need to do more of that. Let's be real. But the idea is that you're doing something on the same time at this of every day, so that when you do transition into running more days per week, it's not so foreign to you. You don't feel like it's breaking your routine. You've already established the routine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think it's really smart to think about that. And just from a physiological standpoint, if we use other activities to support the running, maybe we're not able to run as frequently as we want to right now, but we can hop on the bike. It's low impact. We can get some good base building aerobic work done there. That's going to support the runs. Running is a really, really hard sport. Like I remember when I was first go back and forth with running, and I would run for months and then not run as much and run for months. Getting back into it, I would always feel more out of breath. I would always really struggle to keep a conversational effort, especially like going uphill. And that stuff would have all been improved upon if I was cross training more during the week and focusing more on building that routine. It's just so fundamental to start very small. If you're an athlete who's really new, if you're doing a little walk run, that's going to help facilitate the frequency of training. That's going to help get you to where you want to be. It's going to limit impact forces. Don't use that as a referendum on your abilities. It's good to just say, hey, this is where I'm at. The same thing if you're a runner who does have a little bit more experience, but we're trying to get you to 5 days a week. So we're doing some walk runs in between continuous runs because your body's not maybe ready to handle all of those impact forces yet. The key is really making everything easy and achievable at first. If you give yourself too much, like Sarah said, it's going to be hard to build the habit. It's going to be 2, very hard to keep the habit going. And 3, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for self-criticism, for judgment and things like that, which we want to try to remove from the process as much as possible. We want to try to feel good about what we're doing. And so when the goals are easier, they're smaller, they're easier to achieve, we build a much more positive association with what we're doing. And then it's a lot more likely that we're going to get out there. Right, Drew, just like you mentioned in the chat, like walks on days between runs are great too. It's like, just because you're not running doesn't mean you can't stay active, doesn't mean you can't do something mindful, doesn't mean that you can't get outside and breathe in the air. I have a lot of athletes I keep trying to gently push to do something on non-running days that's not necessarily completely training related. It doesn't crush you. It doesn't, make it harder for you to go out and run the next day, but keeps you engaged, maybe in another aspect of this. And again, start small. If we're focusing on running and getting back into the running, focus mainly on that. You don't need to pour in a ton of other stuff, like trying to also fix your nutrition, trying to also strength train a bunch of times per week, like trying to fix other lifestyle related habits. Start with one thing at a time. I think this was something that was like really evident in our call with Jeff last week, and it's something that a lot of other experts talk about. It's that, you can only have like one big focus at a time, or how many work projects can you effectively work on at a time. I think what the research actually suggests on that, and from the book Atomic Habits, is you can really only focus on 5 projects at once and be successful. And that already feels like a lot, right? So you've got other things going on in your life. You're not most likely you're not prioritizing running above all else. So let's just focus on the running piece. And then over time, when that habit becomes more solidified, we can then bring in other things like cross training or strength training or working on nutrition and other lifestyle stuff. Kylie, you mentioned something about keeping your why visible. Can you explain a little bit about why that's important in the process?
Yeah, I was just putting that in there because I think that sometimes, especially when we are new, things get hard before they get easier. So trying to remember like why we are embarking on this journey and what we want to get out of it can be important. So I like for people to sometimes think about putting that as a visible thing for themselves on like a whiteboard or a post-it note or something, and feel like that can be helpful when maybe you're having like second thoughts or feeling unmotivated to get out the door.
I love that. I know if you come over to our house, there's a believe sign right by the front door, just a reminder, when we walk out the door, to keep that belief, to maybe stay aligned with values and your why and things like that. And I think particularly like those little cues are very important when things are feeling tough. Like I have a sticker on my desk that says you can make a difference. And I look at that, it really helps me. Coaching is a really freaking hard job. I have a lot of hard moments daily, and I look at that and it helps. And I know that for other athletes out there, training is really hard. Like running is a hard sport. So give yourself that opportunity. If you're a visual person, leave yourself a note. If you are a more, I don't know, like an audible kind of person, maybe use affirmation, something like that, with a verbal cue could be really helpful. But just maybe to go back to the basics there, writing out and that makes it real. What is your why? What are you hoping to achieve as a runner? And I know a lot of athletes will put this in their questionnaire when they reach out to us, but then they'll maybe never really open their questionnaire back up again. They'll never like refer back to, where they were at the beginning, even if they're a couple months along in the process. So write that stuff out, use a journal. I mean, journaling is something that, we think is really effective. And it's great for reflection. It's great for taking thoughts and making them real. And I would just encourage you guys to think about that. And again, that's another little thing that, yeah, it can really help a beginner athlete who's looking to build out the habit and work through a lot of those initial challenges around running being difficult, but it's also really helpful for advanced athletes who are veterans to the sport, who have been doing this for a long, long time. I think sometimes when you get into a routine and you're very used to things and you start to grind and you get used to doing the training, and it's like, no matter how you feel, you're getting out there and doing the run because it's that the habit is so ingrained, you can sometimes easily forget about those other things. So just a nice reminder for you guys. So how do we get back into running after taking a long break? I think this is a really important question because as coaches, we work with tons of athletes who have run a lot in the past, and then life has happened, things have come up, running hasn't been a priority, and years pass and the athlete isn't running as much. But we want to get that runner back into the habit of training, re-engaging with the process. Drew, I'm curious what your approach is when working with an athlete who has some running history but has taken a long period of time off.
This is so tough. And this isn't unique to any individual. I don't know a single runner that hasn't had issues with not just comparison, but having been fit and done big things before and then taken a break and then having to start, let's just say at the bottom, and then feeling overwhelmed that they know how far and how much time and effort and energy has to go into getting them back to where they were before, assuming they could even get back there. It's really discouraging and it's tough. And so really trying to avoid that, obviously easier said than done, where you're really trying to focus on today. Like it's really trying to forget everything that's happened, almost like you're brand new at what you're doing, and focusing on the day and focusing on what you can control in the moment, right? We talk about process-oriented goals a lot, but really I'm looking forward. I'm not looking back. Like what you've done before has no impact on what you're doing today. And so really trying to just put those blinders on and focus on, the now.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. I think it's so important to be present in your current athletic self. No matter what you've achieved in the past, it's really important to get a full view and understanding of where you are right now. That is a vital tip for somebody who is also going through an injury. If we spend a lot of time comparing ourselves to what we were doing before, who we perceive ourselves to have been before, all of these things that go into that, I think we sometimes fall into some traps that don't allow us to really engage with the process. I know as coaches, like everyone on this call has probably dealt with an athlete who feels like and pushes you to give them more training volume because they've done a lot more running in the past. But as coaches, we know we have to hold the line. Because of the information that athlete has given you, they haven't been running frequently. It's been months or years since they've been consistent, and so it takes the body time to develop a tolerance to the impact forces of running, and so you have to gradually build them back to that volume level. Yeah, maybe it takes a little less time than with a beginner because they do have that experience, and that experience is important. But if you pour it all on now, it's very likely the athlete will get hurt, right? So a big tip on this when coming back from a long break from running is really trying to ignore your past successes. Like, I know that sounds maybe a little harsh. Like, I don't want you to think like you're not a good athlete, you're not a great person. Like, you guys are all awesome. But if you let those past successes dictate the training you're doing today, likely the training will not be effective. And that's just basic facts of training methodology. Like, you can't train like you were before. That's too risky. You have to meet yourself where you are right now. And so like, I like to have athletes kind of think about developing that beginner's mindset, get back into that learner's mindset in moments like this. Like, what can I learn from this experience? What can I think about today that's going to help get me to where I want to go tomorrow or in the days that are coming down the line? Again, let's take it back full circle to a couple questions ago. If you're one of those athletes who does have a lot of experience in the past, you can do some cross training between those runs, or even add cross training on after a run to up that training volume to really start working on the aerobic system. If you're doing low impact cross training, there's very little likelihood you're going to develop an injury. And you're also going to give yourself that aerobic stress, that aerobic stimulus that you need to continue to get better, even though we're a little volume limited on the running side. And so like for some runners, what that might look like is like, I'm doing a 15-minute run, but then, you know, right after that run, I do another 35 or 40 minutes on the bike, or I do 35, 40 minutes on the bike later on in the afternoon as a double, kind of whatever works for your schedule. Because sometimes marrying habits together is really effective. You've already blocked off that 60-minute time. All right, great. Like, do your run, go inside, get a little extra time on the bike, like totally acceptable. Again, I think in situations like this, it's always better to do runs by time rather than by distance, trying to take some of the metrics out so there's less opportunity for comparison. I know a lot of athletes who are very driven and they get their volume prescribed in miles, tend to sometimes get into the habit of racing those miles. So we really want to be careful of that. It's not how fast you can finish that run intact. It's, you know, what is the quality of that effort? Are you in alignment with the small goals that your coach is setting out for you on that day? You know, those are the things that we really want to focus on. Again, if maybe you're coming back from a long break because of injury, might be a good opportunity to use some of that extra space to think about stuff like nutrition, or to think about stuff like strength training. And if you're on our team, I encourage you to reach out to Megan Flanagan for strength work, or to Kylie and her team at Fly Nutrition for nutrition stuff. Again, like athletes who have had the habit and have had to take a break, they tend to be, because this is so neuromuscular in a lot of ways, that's what habits are, they're ingrained neural pathways in our brains, they tend to be able to get back into the groove a lot quicker. And so they do have space to address some other things, and they often have an idea of what those things are, because when they take time to reflect on their past running experiences, they are able to use that information to think about, like, what do I need to improve on to make running, the running experience better for me now? All right, well, I hope that helps you guys. And I know we just have tons of athletes who are coming back after long breaks and who have running history and getting back into it. So, you know, please, if you got a follow-up question on that, you can always reach out to us. But I want to get into the topic of transitioning from running on the roads and bike paths and whatnot to running on the trails, because we have tons of athletes who are making that transition. And I don't think it's an easy transition. It's a fun transition, but it's definitely a challenging one. Kristen, you had some notes here on comparison that I think were really important to mention.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we talk a lot about, you know, like not comparing yourself to other athletes on Strava, not comparing yourself to the previous athlete that you have also been. But when it comes to transitioning from roads to trails, it is so different. And I personally struggled for years, like coming off a collegiate career, running on the roads, you know, very fast for a few years. And then when I transitioned to trails, I was just mad all the time because I couldn't keep a 7-minute pace running straight up a mountain. So I think the key here is that, you know, your times on the roads do not translate to your time on the trail. An 8-minute mile on the road, a 10-minute mile on the road is not the same on the trail. So give yourself a lot of grace, give yourself a lot of patience. I mean, it's really funny to me now, anytime I am running like an incredibly steep grade and I just think like, remember when I thought I could do this in 7 minutes? Or do you remember when I thought it's like, it's hilarious to me now because it's just like such a naive point of view. So definitely like, don't beat yourself up for not going as fast as you think you should go. If, you're used to running really quick miles on the roads, it's not going to be the same. Even on relatively like flat and rolling trails, it's not going to be the same.
Totally. Yeah. Kylie, you want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, no, I had a similar, it's similar to Kristen's, just making that transition coming from a road background was hard, and like forcing myself to realize that, oh, power hiking is part of this sport, and slowing down the pace is part of this as well. And kind of getting used to like having to pay attention to where your feet are landing, and like working on more like ankle strength and stability and those sorts of things that come up, because on the road you can kind of get into, I think, just running for so long, your body can almost just get used to it, and you're just like go out and it's like this automatic fluid motion if you've been doing it for a long time. And then when you get on the trail, it's just so different. Yeah, I think also like going with friends sometimes can help that might already do some trail running, etc., because they could potentially like give you some insight or tips, and just being prepared that like it's going to be hard. Because I also for a while was leading a Trail Sisters group in the Roaring Fork Valley, and there were a lot of new women in that group, and a lot of them would get really discouraged if they hadn't been running on trails very much, or it was like they were new trail runners, and they were focused on how slow they felt, and just feeling a little discouraged by that. But then, being part of that group, I think it helped actually for them to realize that, oh, this is a normal part of the sport. It's just different than like the road running scene.
Yeah. And I think it's just so important to normalize that the fact that the transition isn't going to be seamless. It is so much easier to run on the roads, and we love road running. It's great for building efficiency. It's great for becoming a more efficient, better runner. But it still will take time to translate those skills to the trails. And that's because there are some slight neuromuscular patterns there that are going to be different. Running uphill is really hard. And I really love how you guys, Kristen and Kylie, you both normalized that power hiking is part of this experience on the trails. Right, exactly. Like we're all 2 thumbs up, like as many thumbs as possible are going to be up for power hiking. Athletes at every level are out power hiking. I think our kind of general consensus around that, and this is especially important for new runners, is if you can't see the top of the hill, just hike, just start hiking. It's awesome. It's part of it. Use those glutes, work on your glute strength. Like if you can see the top of the hill, yeah, give running up to the top a try. If you can't sustain what feels like a easy-ish effort going up the hill, like the whole way, that's okay. Run part of it and power hike part of it. Like totally fine to be really flexible there. And it's okay for your heart rate to come up on hills. If you don't run some hills, you will never get better at running hills. That is the facts. So you have to practice running uphill a little bit, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it's a few steps at first, and then you're power hiking. Those hills you can see the top of, those are great for, just giving the running a shot. And then I still do that. I power hike so much. And I actually look forward to power hiking because it's like a little bit of a break on these long adventures that we get to do now. I feel like the other important piece to all of this is, just if you are a newer runner transitioning to the trails, like you could use your long run as that like transition point and keep your other runs super easy, because we want to concentrate stress, and like new terrain is going to be more stressful on your system. It's going to be more stressful mentally. So try to concentrate that stress. Don't try to run every run on the trails. Mix it up. And when you're transitioning to the trails, like say at the end of a winter, it's been a really long winter. I think 99.9% of our athletes are running all on the roads right now. Like there's so little trail access because of how much snow there is. Like just know that the transition time-wise from running on the roads to getting out on the trails is not only going to be physically demanding, but it's going to be mentally hard too, because it takes so much longer to get those miles in, like Kristen mentioned earlier. So go easy on yourself, like use that opportunity to work on your fueling, bring an extra snack, like take a break at the top of a long climb and put your head up and like take in a view, and just enjoy that experience. Like we're here to train and to get better, right? But also like we want to be mindful of the entire experience and making it fun. And if you really use comparison and self-judgment in that process of transitioning back to the trails after a long winter on the roads, that transition is just going to sting a lot more than it has to. I know this is a reminder for myself as well when I say that, because that transition is always tough. Drew, it looks like you've got something to add here.
Yeah, just super basic. It's trail running is so different than road running. And so when you are transitioning from really one to the other, it doesn't matter which way you're transitioning. It's not fair to yourself to just assume that it's similar, right? It's like you're so used to playing checkers and you want to play chess and you're just frustrated because the pieces don't move the same, right? It's the same concept that we were talking about before, where if you are even an advanced road runner looking to transition to trail running, the smartest way, in my opinion, to go about it is to pretend you're a new runner. It's doing all the same things. It's going slow, going easy, learning as much as you can, and really trying to just be easy on yourself and just get rid of all expectation, really.
Totally. I think having a sense of humor about it is also incredibly important. There have been so many times where like in Colorado, a lot of times like my winters consisted mainly of road running, because the access to the trails is non-existent. And if it is, it's really icy, it's snowy, it's frustrating sometimes to run. And there are a lot of times where, and like I mentioned in the chat, you know, where I'm thinking this should be easier than it is, but it's just not. Like there are so many times where I just start singing like, one of these things is not like the other. Like these are not the same. These are not the same. They shouldn't be in the same category. Like they're in their own lanes. So I think keeping that in mind and just have a sense of humor about it. Like this, we are not solving the climate crisis through our Tuesday morning run. Like we are just running because we love to run. So have fun with it. Like it doesn't have to be this big, scary, overwhelming, very serious thing.
Yeah, you don't have to overthink it. And I think that's super, super important to think about. All right, let's quickly go through strength training for a newer runner. How does a newer runner get started with building a strength training habit that supports their running? I feel like we can answer this one in 3 minutes or less. Kylie.
I mean, I usually recommend that people are at least coordinating with their coach to make sure that what they're doing is congruent with their training and that they're not messing themselves up with the training process. Because I've had some athletes do that where they'll be like, oh, I'm starting strength training, and then they like don't give me any details, and they're like, oh, my legs were wrecked, so I like couldn't do the workout or something like that. So just letting us know when strength training is happening, and we can try and build it into your training schedule. And then I suggest working with someone that does have experience with runners, because it's going to be a little bit different than like if you're, working towards a CrossFit competition or something. So making sure you have like the appropriate professional on your side when you're doing that.
Yeah, and if you are an athlete who doesn't really know where to start, first reach out to your coach, and then I hope your coach mentions to hire Megan Flanagan, because having an expert who understands the training that you're doing and then how to fit the strength training component into that our pre-existing structure is very important. Hard days, we need to concentrate the stress there. If we over index on strength, the running quality is going to diminish significantly, because strength training, it really takes a toll on the muscles, creates a lot of muscle breakdown, which inhibits neuromuscular function on our runs. And especially when you're new, we really want to develop good biomechanical patterns, good and efficiency, economy, all of that. On the other side of this, like if you are thinking about, kind of doing it on your own, easily achievable routines like Megan Flanagan's Strong and Stable Legs, which she's developed for Microcosm, the David Roche Mountain Legs and Speed Legs, all of that, very short, quick hitters, covers all the bases, 2 to 3 days a week, and really starting that habit out small, maybe geared towards 1 day, working up to 3 days when we developed a tolerance over multiple months. And the other thing is, like, if you're trying to self-prescribe yourself strength, like the strength work has to be functional and related to running. If it's not going to help you as a runner. It's just going to make you sore and make you a less efficient runner. And so again, if there's any question, ask your coach. Your coach is a running coach, and your coach is most likely going to direct you towards working with an expert. Every athlete that I work with who works with Megan Flanagan has nothing but amazing things to say about that relationship. They become stronger and they become better runners and more resilient athletes as a result of that. So I know that's a strong plug for Megan, but it is really worth it to engage with those experts. All right, let's keep rolling through here. Great question. Should new runners try marathons or ultras? Sarah, why don't you start us out on this one?
I think that any runner at any level can set any dream. Like we talked about last week, like we are limitless. And so I think it's great to dream as big or small as you want, and to let go of a timeline. So I don't think it is a great idea for somebody to come in and say, I'm brand new to running, I want to run an ultra by the end of this year. But I think it's totally appropriate to say, I'm brand new to running, and one day I dream of running an ultra marathon. And like 100%, we can begin today to work towards that goal, no matter where you are. But please be mindful of timelines, because if we're forcing a timeline, we just run the risk of you getting hurt and losing the passion and trying to get things to happen when your body just needs more time or your mind needs more time and things like that. But yes, I think that I don't think that your dreams need to be limited because you're new to something.
100%. Drew, you had a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I really much agree with Sarah. She's awesome. But the idea is you're tempering expectation, disregarding timelines, right? Not setting yourself up for failure is what it is. I like to tell people, no one's born a marathoner. No one's born with like a Western States belt buckle attached to their waist, right? Everyone starts somewhere, and we see success take place over the course of several years, really. I've got a lot of marathoners on my roster right now, very interested in qualifying for Boston, and some of them closer than others. But the idea is you don't decide one day, I've been running local 5Ks and I want to run a marathon and I want to qualify for Boston, the first marathon I do, right? For some people, it takes not just years, but you're talking like 6, 7, 8, maybe more marathons, and slowly chiseling away at time before you end up qualifying for something so prestigious. And so understanding that there's always ups and downs, and planning for that really over a longer timeline so that you very much can achieve that success.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess we use the marathon and the ultra as kind of the guidepost to this question, purely because those are what people normally target when they reach out to us. It's not to say that your marathon it couldn't be a 5K or a 10K. It's just using the content and the context that Sarah and Drew just mentioned here to inform yourself in developing timelines that are appropriate for you based on where you are today and where you want to go, and ultimately what your goals are. I love the fact that we're limitless. Like, we can achieve any goal that we set our minds to if we give ourselves the appropriate amounts of time to get there and are patient then and stay true to that process. I think that's one of the greatest challenges that we have as coaches, is helping athletes get to an informed timeline and then helping them stick to that timeline when that timeline is a lot bigger than athletes actually realize. And like, when you see an athlete highlighted in the Rad Weekend update who's run a marathon or 100 or just completed, something that feels really epic, know that years and years and years of work have likely gone into that. There's no overnight success stories out there. There's so much that's happening behind the scenes that's not often always celebrated, especially in Western culture and society. And so our brains tend to forget about the journey that's gotten that person to that point. And we think totally about that outcome rather than like the process-oriented goals and the small steps and like the struggles and the ups and downs that like really create all of the content and the context of that actual journey. So please, this is one of those moments. If you're unsure, stop, rewind, listen to this part of the podcast, the community call again, and just try to think about that concept of timelines a little bit. I think it's really important, especially for new athletes, and old athletes too. Like, we all have these delusions of grandeur. We want to race hundreds and win them and do this crazy stuff, qualify for Boston. I love those dreams, but let's just remember that those things take time. We have to develop as people and athletes along the way in order to be successful. All right, well, now we're really cruising. Let's see. How about static stretching and foam rolling? I wonder if we have a difference of opinions across the team of coaches on here. Kristen, what's your opinion? Do we need these things?
Hecking yes. Yes, yes, yes. I think if you're doing run training and if you're incorporating any kind of strength routine into your training, body work is essential. Like, that is what keeps you going. It's like flossing your teeth. It is so important.
Yeah. All right. In the interest of time, I'm just going to say that, yes, a little bit of stretching and rolling can be helpful. Is the research a little bit mixed on this? Yes, absolutely. In general, rules are don't static stretch before you run. If it feels good to you, doing some static stretching after your runs is great. Foam rolling, kind of, again, like, mixed research on this stuff, not a ton of information out there. If it feels good for you, please do it. I recommend to athletes who are like tighter or feel like they're under a lot of tension to kind of do it. If anything, it's a way to build awareness around where some of that tension lies in your body and maybe some areas that could be problematic for you as you continue to build your volume. Is it a necessity? No, probably not, but maybe it helps. So think about whether or not it helps in the context of you and kind of like the unique athlete that you are. All right, this is a great question. Are treadmill runs okay for newer runners? And how should I pass the time on the treadmill if I'm bored? Sarah, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, I've actually been working with an athlete this year who has who's a beginner runner who really started with the treadmill and has used that as a tool to build confidence and build endurance while you know, he's starting to run outdoors. And so I think it's great, and there's nothing wrong with the treadmill. And if, you know, I just encourage you, if there is some apprehension or some fears around running outside, to like talk with your coach about that and maybe try to build it in and work up to it. Maybe not always do treadmill runs, you know, if there's something holding you back from that. But certainly it's a great tool. And then in terms of being bored, I think talking to your coach and see if there are ways that they can maybe add something to the workout, some intervals or something that makes sense with your place in training. And then I love making a good playlist. Some people set their treadmills up in front of a TV, and, you know, whatever you need to do, like listening to a podcast or an audiobook can be great and can help with that easy running, that conversational pace. So being mindful of like the tempo of the music you put on your playlist is a good idea.
Yeah, awesome. Great tips. Yeah, treadmills are great tools. You've probably heard us advocate for them a lot. If you're a frequent listener of this call, it's been a rough winter. So we've got athletes of all levels using the treadmill. I think my one thing is to ask that runners run with at least a 1% incline on the treadmill to help with those impact forces, and then going all the way up to maybe 3% for a more advanced runner. And just keep that on all the time. That resistance is really great for building a little bit of strength too. And again, like just limiting those impact forces for some athletes who aren't as far along in the process, having the treadmill going can really help with that kind of neuromuscular function and building cadence and things like that. And so it can get easy, can be easy to get carried away there. So just be careful with that. And that's why we like using a little bit of incline. All right. This is a question for you, Kylie. How much should beginner runners think about nutrition?
Lots to say on the, well, kind of a lot to say, but not really. I think it's something that is overlooked by a lot of people just because they maybe have been conditioned to think that less nutrition is better, no matter if you're like walking or running a mile or something like that. Oh, it doesn't really matter. I think that it is really important to understand that as you start getting into an exercise routine, that your needs do change, and especially if somebody is training for a marathon or an ultra, and those needs are going to go up exponentially. And if you aren't prepared for that, or you're not adjusting your nutrition to kind of match that, the training demands, then, you know, down the line, it's going to catch up. And so, just being aware that, you know, you're at increased injury risk if you aren't increasing your nutrition to match that training status and stimulus. And there's so many different things to kind of think about in regards to the effect that it can have on performance and recovery. And I think that those things are really important to look out for too, like your pre and post workout routine. And then we've talked a lot on here about like race nutrition and how important that is to dial in. And for new runners, that might be something new. Like they might have no idea that like, oh, I actually need to, you know, fuel myself during these long efforts, or I'm going to feel like crap. So, I mean, in summary, yes, it's at the top of the list, I think. And I oftentimes emphasize to my athletes that are having a hard time making it a priority that like, if you can't prioritize your nutrition, you know, maybe we can't prioritize that training then, because it should be a non-negotiable in my mind.
Yeah, I do think it's really important. And we've seen just a number of athletes who, just have, you know, maybe inadvertently been under fueling and stuff like that, get hurt. Fueling is just such a important component to this process. And I would say that, next to developing the running habit, it's the singular most important kind of like lifestyle element that's going to affect your training after simply getting out and doing your runs. And so, having an understanding of that, and something that we see with athletes is like, over time, they become more consistent. And then, that consistency gets them to a certain place and a certain level where they can't really go on without having started to focus on the nutrition. They're feeling dehydrated. They're not able to complete their runs at the effort level they'd like can't sustain effort and things like that. And then it does take stepping back and looking at these more holistic parts of the process that go beyond just the running. And so, if you are an athlete who's new to this and has questions, again, like, I would recommend reaching out to an expert like Kylie. She's helped a lot of athletes on our team and well beyond this team, and is one of the best in the entire country at this. And so when she says you need to focus on your nutrition, everybody should be listening to that. So yeah, maybe just take a little bit of time to assess whether or not that's been a priority for you in your training, and what kind of gains you could make as a result of focusing a little bit on that. All right, we got the last question. We've made it just before 9 o'clock, which I love. I feel like this is just like my favorite heavy hitter of the entire call, which is why I saved it for last. Should beginner runners extrapolate data and information about performance from their watches? Kristen, why don't you let us know how you feel about this?
I don't think it's necessary. I think if you're just getting into running and your first instinct is to just extrapolate all the data that you can find, I think that's a really good way to start comparing yourself to other runners, which leads you down the wrong path. That's not where you want to go. I think that if you're extrapolating all this data, one question to ask yourself is like, why are you running? Why did you start? So remind yourself of the why. What are you applying the data to is another question. And just, be honest with yourself. It might not be you might not be comfortable with that, with the answer that you have. But I think if you have a fitness or even a weight loss related goal for some reason, I could be a little bit more understanding, but I think just jumping into the deep end and going all out, like right off the bat, sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Kylie, can you take this one step further?
Sure. So I think a lot of new runners tend to maybe not have a sense of what actual effort should look like. And they tend to go too hard. And so if you're constantly focusing on data, it might not exactly be relevant, I guess, to you if you aren't aware of like what that effort looks like. So I personally really recommend RPE usage, just because it gets people used to tuning into their body too. It's just, I think oftentimes we lose sense of, like, if we're so focused on the data, we lose sense of listening to how we actually feel. And same thing with our nutrition, like hunger and fullness, that kind of thing. So like getting back to like actually listening and recognizing our efforts, I think is really important, because again, like so many new people, I have a hard time with knowing what is appropriate pace and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. The watch can just complicate stuff, opens up doors for comparison. Like Kristen mentioned, it it just creates an internal dialogue and an opportunity for comparison and self-judgment. Also, watches are not accurate. They're not that accurate. Yeah, our pace per mile could be pretty accurate, But other than that, training readiness, not accurate. Recovery score, not accurate. Sleep data, no, not really very accurate. The list goes on and on. HRV, it's not that accurate. Like your Garmin, that's like a secondary feature. Like don't trust that. Go with how you feel. The moment you start putting emphasis on a watch that like literally these are features that are designed to get you to pay more money for that watch, it's a marketing thing. If you put your emphasis on that, you're opening up a door to, I feel like, a lot of disappointment. And we want to get back to those basics. What's your why? What feels good? What doesn't feel good? And learning about yourself through those mechanisms. Like you are your own best judge of many things. And then you have a coach who can also help to validate or invalidate the things that you're feeling based on, you know, the information you're giving them. So I just want you guys to think about that. I was reminded of that the other day when I was on my run, and my Garmin beeps every day after 10 minutes and tells me how I'm doing compared to other runs during the week with no knowledge whatsoever to whether or not I just did a workout the day before, or whether or not I have health stuff going on or any of this stuff. The watch has no clue. You can't program any of that into your watch. And so, you know, tuning those things out is really important. Also, I've asked many times if anyone knows how to shut that off on a Garmin. Please let me know, because I'd really appreciate it. It's my least favorite feature in my Garmin watch.
Was definitely going to say, turn that notification off.
Can't figure it out, but it keeps telling me if I'm doing good or bad.
Start a run a mile in. Hey, TJ, you suck today. Have a good day.
Yeah. It's like having David Goggins on your wrist.
Right?
It's not a good idea.
So motivating. All right. Thank you guys. In all seriousness, I hope everyone found this helpful. Thank you, coaches. Really great work. Such good information here for athletes. Yeah. And next week, we are not having a call, but we will be back the following week to talk about running your first ultra and developing a tool set for developing your first ultra. So hope to see you all there. Bye. Have a good weekend.